We have all heard of the legendary Trojan War described in the Iliad of Homer, when 1,000 Greek ships headed to Troy across the Aegean Sea. For 10 years, the walls of the city were impregnable, and finally, when the Greeks were already tired of the war, Odysseus offered them one last chance for victory. They built a big horse made of wood and left it as a sign that they surrender. Then the Greeks burnt out their camp and went home. When the Trojans dragged the horse behind their walls, along with it they dragged a small group of Greeks inside. At night, during the victory celebration, the saboteurs got out and opened the gate of the city for Greeks, thirsty for the last battle. And Troy was defeated. Of course it's just a myth. At least that's how people thought until 1871. I'll tell you what happened right after you give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. One eccentric German named Heinrich Schliemann was a little obsessed with the ancient Greece. So little that he named his children Agamemnon and Andromache. The dude was rich enough to go on retirement at 36. Having a lot of money and free time, Schliemann went to Anatolia, where, as vaguely assumed, was none other than the legendary Troy. Well, to start excavations, he needs to understand where to dig. Do you know how in general archaeology appeared? Just somewhere between the late 18th and early 19th centuries, someone found time to wonder what it is, little strange hills scattered across all of Greece to the Middle East. And then more, and took the time to answer this question. These were the ruins of ancient cities. If shortly these hills appear in the result of people living on the same place for hundreds of years. And garbage left behind by people over time raises the level of the Earth's surface this area. In addition, many of the early settlements were originally built on elevations for better overall protection. Generally, each founded hill could easily turn out to be an ancient city with treasures. People loved treasures, and so they became digging these hills. And that's how appeared archaeology. I'm kidding, of course, but actually it's not that far from the truth. Let's return to Schliemann, who had only ancient stories and some academic guesses. He began to dig almost every hill that he could find in this region, but unsuccessfully. Then Schliemann met one Englishman who claimed that knows where the Troy is, because he bought it. But he had no money for excavations, so he just allowed Schliemann to dig on his own land in exchange for the part of the future finds. Schliemann hired about 100 local workers, gave them picks and shovels, and sent them to the city on the hill called Hisarlik. At first, they didn't find anything, however. Gradually, the ruins began to appear. Workers continued to excavate and found the second city under the ruins of the first. Antique buildings on antique buildings. This is probably a very important place. Schliemann thought he found Troy, but Troy is still one of the oldest cities, and it is logical that it will be buried at the very bottom. So, he said, "Guys, put away your shovels. Now is the time to use dynamites. It's archaeology, babe." Yes. Overjoyed the finds, Schliemann used the best a time-tested archaeological method, as blasting to hell of everything at the excavation spot. One archaeologist later said that Schliemann inflicted Troy more damage than the Greeks ever could. Thus, Schliemann reached to one of the lower levels and found there Priam's treasure. Artifacts of the last Trojan king. They were about 1,000 years older than Troy, and Troy turned out to be 5 levels higher and ruined. Press publications had led to the Ottoman government took away Schliemann's permission and sued to court for the gold he found, which he smuggled out. However, the bottom line is that Schliemann and Calvert are still correctly found the location and proved that Troy most likely existed. This mean that history about the Trojan War is truth? Probably not. But the war somewhere really was. There were 1,000 ships? Most likely no. The gods flew there and there was a big horse helped to finish the war? Probably not. But Troy more likely existed and most likely was destroyed. In general, with all these conjectures and assumptions is really difficult. They are all based just on several written sources. One of these sources already mentioned Homer, but where is a fact? And where is only fiction from Homer's stories? It's a question that people thinking about for centuries. Homer's Achilles, the bravest Greek, going towards the Trojan warriors on a chariot grinding the ground. The Trojans begin to step back. The chariot draws ever closer and is about to grind the Trojans with the ground. And then Achilles stupidly jumps off the chariot and starts to cut everyone with a sword. And now, actually, The fact that people jumped off chariots before the battle is truth. However, it is surprising that Homer correctly described it, because already in his time, 6 ages after the Trojan War, the Greeks didn't use the chariots during the war, because Greece is not best place for horses and especially for the chariots. If we want to use chariot effectively for ramming people or use it as mobile platform for shooting, you need enough open and flat terrain. But Greece is mountains and rocky fields. That is reason why chariots during the war are not played such a role as we say in the ancient Egypt. Greek war chariots during the Trojan War were used more like a taxi than anything else. But Homer exaggerates a little and describes chariots cooler than they were in reality. Homer has frankly wrong things. Sometimes he forgets that it was the Bronze Age and describes characters using iron tools they just didn't have. And the biggest question connected with Homer: how big was Trojan War in reality? Homer says that in the sum, the Greeks sent a fleet of 1186 ships. If you count, it turns out that this is approximately 142,000 soldiers. As you know, Troy siege lasted for 10 years. Provisions that would be required by such number of soldiers for 10 years, even if they rob it around, looks unimaginable. Also, the question is about workers in Greece. What happens if 142,000 people just don't go to work for 10 years? This is probably an exaggeration, but some scholars believe that the numbers described by Homer are not far from the truth. Maybe there were a little less ships. The war did not last 10 years. However, these numbers is a reason for collapse of Mycenaean economy after the Trojan War. Why could the war last so long? It's easy. Siege technologies of that time couldn't keep up with wall construction technologies, so the only way to capture the fortress is to make the people in it starve. And so, the Greeks failed in surrounding Troy and cutting it off from the sea, then the siege at all could last forever. And by the way, you know what it really was, the famous Trojan horse? Nobody knows. However, there are some interesting suggestions. Some people think that was a special construction with saboteurs inside. There is a theory about that it was one of the first rams that people can hide under. A more interesting theory is that this horse was the symbol of Poseidon, because among other things, Poseidon was the god of the horses and his symbol often was a horse. And you know what else Poseidon symbolized? The earthquake? Yes, Poseidon was also the god of earthquakes. So, one theory is that the Trojan horse is an earthquake, which destroyed part of the wall and allowed the Greeks to finally enter Troy. Most likely, the truth about the Trojan War will remain a historical mystery. However, the myth about this battle still gives us some ideas about the War of Bronze Age. It also reminds us when we study history, we shouldn't think that myths are completely fantastic tales. Maybe history and myths have more in common than we think. Thank you for watching. Please press like and subscribe to my channel. Write down what you like and what you don't. It's important for me. Thank you, bro.